more. Nice. Okay. This is Rabbi Chaim Brovender Parsha Shiur, the WebYeshiva, and we'll learn a little bit about the new sefer that we're about to enter into, the sefer of Vayikra. Sefer Vayikra. Now, it makes sense in a certain way that the book of Vayikra should follow the building of the Mishkan. It was one of the reasons for the Mishkan, not the only reason, but one of the practical reasons for the Mishkan was that we're going to bring the Korbanot that the Torah wants us to bring. So if there are rules involved with the Korbanot, now is a good time to learn them. And so the book of Vayikra follows clearly the building of the Mishkan and the avodah in the Mishkan, the avodah that was done in the Mishkan of the avodah of the Korbanot. And while we may be learning in the course of learning the book of Vayikra some Korbanot that are not so relevant in the desert, nevertheless, it's important to learn them. And it's important to learn them in a proper manner. And that's the book of Vayikra. But the book of Vayikra also presents us with problems that have to be addressed in one way or the other. And the main problem with the book of Vayikra is that since the Churban Beit HaMikdash, of course, we don't bring Korbanot. We have no way, whatever the reasons might be, there is no way for us to bring Korbanot today in the situation which we find ourselves. Can't bring any Korbanot. So that means that about a fifth of the Torah doesn't seem to be relevant to the lives that we are supposed to be living. We should have a Beit HaMikdash, and we should have Korbanot that respond to the demands of the Torah. But we don't have them. So the Ramban in his discussion of Korban, he points out two things. That one is that Korban affect everything in our lives. The good things, we have to bring a Korban Todah and Chas v'Shalom. The bad things, we have to bring a Korban Chatat. And then there are Korbanot that are given because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do so. And if you look at the Pasuk, Perek Aleph Pasuk Tet in Vayikra, Yirchatz Pamayim, it has something to do with the innards of the Olah. Viktir HaKohen et HaKol HaMizbecha, and the Kohen is the one who affects the Korban, that is our obligation every single day. HaMizbecha. Olah, Ishe, Reach nichoach l'Hashem. Olah, it goes up entirely. It's consumed by fire. Ishe is the word Eish. Reach nichoach l'Hashem. Right? It is a Reach nichoach. It's pleasing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah. So the Ramban says it's pleasing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the ultimate kind of religious activity. Reach nichoach L'Hashem. The Ramban builds a lot on those words. Reach nichoach. It's pleasant for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Pleasant for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Ramban knows that this opinion does not stand alone, but there's another opinion, the opinion of Harab ben Moren and Nebuchim. You see where it starts in the sixth line. V'amar Harab ben Moren Nebuchim. I can't underline it, so you just have to follow. And with me, my hand, you see the hand? V'amar Rabbi Brovender Parsha. In the book, there's a book called Brovender Parsha, a very well-known book, even though, sometimes it seems a bit tedious. But the Rambam wrote this book for the people of understanding. Not the people who just follow the rules, but people who want to understand beyond the rules why the rules are there. So he quotes Rabbi Brovender Parsha, and he says, Ki ta'am ha-korbanot. Why are they korbanot? Why are they korbanot? Why does God want us to have korbanot? So the Rambam in the Brovender Parsha wrote, Bavur, Mitzrim v'Kasdim, the great nations of the ancient world, the Egyptians and the Babylonians, Asher Hayu Yisrael Garim v'Toshavim v'Artzam. I mean, they were the leading nations of the ancient world. And Eretz Yisrael was considered to be in the land, in their territory. I mean, the major forces were Bavel and Mitzrayim. Bavel, Babylonia, Mitzrayim, Egypt, and we were living in their midst. Hayu ovdim lebakar ulitzon. They would serve. I mean, their lives depended on the animals that they had, the sheep and the cows. I mean, they got the milk, they butchered the cows, they ate the meat. This was the major economic enterprise. Ki ha-Mitzrim ovdim letaleh. The Egyptians served smaller animals. V'Kasdim ovdim l'shedim asher yir'u lahem b'damot seirim. And the Egyptians served goats, and they made the figures of these animals. V'anshei hodu ad hayom lo yishchetu bakar la'olam. And Hodu, people who live in India, they even today they have a sort of special idea about large animals, and they would never slaughter them. So this is based on an idea. There's an idea involved. Why not slaughter them? Why not eat them? If you don't do it, then you have an effect and an influence on people who are not like you. There's always this kind of competition amongst religious groups of who does it better, whatever it is they're supposed to do. Ba'avur Kain, and because of this, we're still in the Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim. Ba'avur Kain tziva lishchot ele hashlosha minim. And so it turns out that the Torah wants to separate us from this practice. And so the Torah ordered us Sheidim Ashayulem Bidmut Adavar Sheyu Choshvim Keim Betachlit Ha'avera, and that the Torah tells us to do it in spite of the fact that these other great nations thought that this would be a great transgression. Asher Yakrivu Liborei, that's what they should give back, to sacrifice to the Creator. Uvo Yikapru Ha'onot, Uvo Yikapru Ha'abonot, that in this way we will atone for our transgressions. Kikein yitrapu ha'amunot haraot shehem madvei hanefesh. And in this way, we will kind of release ourselves from the influence of the evil religions that surrounded us wherever we went. Ki kol midot madveh v'kol choli, all the sicknesses, lo yitrapei pi im behavcho. And the way you cure something is by doing the opposite. So if you don't want people to feel that the animals are very important and godlike somehow, so you eat them for lunch, and then everybody understands that they can't really be that important. Ki im ve'avcho, ele dvarav, uvahem ha'erich. This is what the Rambam wrote in the Moreh Nevuchim, uvahem ha'erich, and he wrote this at length. V'heinei, hein divrei havai. They are really foolish things to say, meaningless. Yirapu shever gedola bekushia rabba al nikala. It is very easy to see that they are incorrect. Yasu shulchan Hashem megoal. There's a way of saying it's really wrong. Sheinam rak lahotzi milibam shel rishaim v'tipshei olam. And it's just really, I've got to do something about this. V'akatuv amar kihem lechem ishe l'reach nichoach. Him, you understand. The important point here is that the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim writes that the Korbanot were a kind of reaction to foreign kinds of religious ideas. People thought all kinds of things and attribute them to great powers in the world. And the Rambam thought that this way of thinking about Korbanot is absolutely wrong. And he brought several proofs that this said, but the first proof is that it says in the pasuk that we read above, Reach nichoach Lashem. It's a Ishe, Allah is an Ishe, it's a fire that creates a Reach nichoach, a pleasant smell, Lashem. That's why Hashem wants to do it. This was in the pasuk, because not because he's teaching us to avoid the religions of others, but because it's something that pleases God. Now, it doesn't tell us how it pleases God or in what way it pleases God. And maybe I'll never know the answer to that question, but it says in the pasuk quite clearly that it pleases God. If it pleases God, it can't be limited to a kind of educational direction in which we are proving to ourselves that we shouldn't have anything to do with foreign religious ideas, even though we know for a fact that these foreign ideas, as the Rambam points to, had a tremendous effect on us. And that's why the Jews built the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. They built the golden calf because that was the animal worshipped in Egypt. So you can't say they weren't affected, and it didn't have something to do with the future history of Am Yisrael. That's what happened. But the Ramban says, look, it says Reich Nichoach Lashem. How could the Rambam say that it's only to educate us? And the Rambam is sort of saying, I know that the book of Vayikra is mostly about Korbanot, not only, but mostly. And the book of Bamidbar and Dvarim also contains material that is important for the Beit HaMikdash. But we don't have a Beit HaMikdash, the Rambam says. How could it be How could it be that we don't have a Beit HaMikdash? How could it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that we shouldn't be able to do the elementary religious activity that the Ramban says is Reich Nichoach L'Hashem? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu allow the Beit HaMikdash to be destroyed? Why were we in a position we can't do what the Beit HaMikdash wants us to do? Is this something a little bit odd here? So the Ramban came along and said, well, maybe it was never expected that the Beit HaMikdash would last forever. Maybe the Beit HaMikdash represents a time when sacrifices weren't on, but we got out of that. We're not that much involved. We're not so interested. I mean, if we were interested in Beit HaMikdash, we would make a Beit HaMikdash. But apparently we're not. Apparently people are not. They don't see their way clear to building the Beit HaMikdash. Maybe that's what the Rambam was talking about. The Rambam said that since there's no Beit HaMikdash, maybe there's an educational basis for Korbanot. Maybe Korbanot come to teach you things, and that opens up a door and says, well, what do you think? What do you think? So you look at modern interpreters of Torah, and you'll see they address this question of what the point of having Korbanot might be. So the Rambam said the point was to protect us from our inclinations to appreciate what the major powers in the world can offer. We have that inclination. We don't want that. We don't want that. Okay, so we'll work on it in different ways. At the beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu working on it by having Korbanot. We have to work on it with education, with attempts to create a world in which foolishness is not so highly regarded as it is today. And we have to practice that. We have to practice that in some way. But in order to understand the machloket a little bit better, I think we have to look at two other sources in the Rambam. First, we'll look at Hilchot Melachim, Perek Yud Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Do you see it? It's the second text on the sheet. One second, let me just.
כן. את מתחת נראה לי. כן, הנה זה.
Okay. HaMelech HaMashiach, that's the Rambam's topic. The Rambam believed absolutely in the coming of the Mashiach and wrote about it fairly extensively in his book, the Yad HaChazakah, in Hilchot Melachim. The parak that we are reading is one of the prakim at the end of Hilchot Melachim that talks about the Melech HaMashiach. Melech HaMashiach, he's a Melech and he's a Mashiach. Melech means he controls the physical world, and Mashiach means he's anointed spiritually. Atid la'amod u'lachzir malchut David liyeshna. He says, what's it going to look like the time of the Mashiach? He says, Ya'amod, he will be able to achieve, u'lachzir malchut David liyeshna. He will be able to re-establish the kingship of David. L'memshala Rishona, as it was at the beginning. Uboneh HaMikdash, and he, the Melech HaMashiach, this is like a reason that's used for not building the Beit HaMikdash. He's Boneh HaMikdash, meaning that That's the job of the Melech HaMashiach. Umekabetz nidchei Yisrael. Mekabetz nidchei Yisrael. B'nei Yisrael. Chozrim kol hamishpatim b'yamav k'shayu mikodem. So that the idea of Mashiach is reacting to the imperfection that we've created in history. We've created situations which deny us the option of fulfilling the Torah in its proper way, in the way that it should be fulfilled. And Mashiach will kind of handle that. And b'yamav k'shahayu mikodem, and he will reestablish the world that we read about or learn about in the Chumash and in the Gemara. Umakrivim korbanot, and the people at the time of the Mashiach, following the Mashiach, will be able to sacrifice once again. Va'osin shmitin v'yovlot, and they will do the laws of Shemitah and Yovel, k'chol mitzvata ha'amura b'Torah, as the Torah demands of us. V'kol mi she'eino ma'amin bo, whoever denies the Mashiach, his authority and his capacity, or mi she'eino mechake lebiato, or someone who does not wait with bated breath for his return. Lo b'shar nevi'im bilvad hu kofer. He's not only denying prophecy, and the prophets all spoke about the coming of the Mashiach and how everything will be as it should be. Ela b'Torah uve Moshe Rabbeinu, denying the Torah and Moshe Rabbeinu's giving of the Torah. Shaharei HaTorah alav shene'amar said about the Torah, v'shav Hashem Elokecha shmutcha v'richamecha v'shav kibetzcha v'gomer. So that pasuk is found in the section in the parshat Vayelech, which is called the Perka Tshuva, and Tshuva means not that only that a person does Tshuva, or even that a community, a city does Tshuva, but that history does Tshuva, and it goes back to where we left off, when it was all the way it should be. So what do we see in this statement of the Rambam? The Rambam says that they're going to give korbanot. The Rambam doesn't say in this place that we've outgrown the korbanot, or the fact that the nations of the world may not be idolatrous quite in the same way, or the fact that the Gemara says we've kind of done away with Avodah Zarah. We overcame it in some way. All of that is not what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam is saying they're going to be korbanot. They're going to be korbanot. We're talking about the Rambam's opinion. So the way to explain, the way that you might want, that I think is reasonable to explain, the distinction between what the Ramban quotes for the Moreh Nevuchim, right? Remember the Rambam said the korbanot were an attack on the accepted principles of religion in those times. That the Egyptians, that the Babylonians, they had powerful religious organs, and the Jewish people were called upon to deny them and to do away with their ideologies and not allow that ideology to enter into the framework of Am Yisrael. So the Rambam, the Rambam said, well, I mean, if that's the reason for korbanot, then the fact that we're missing the korbanot is not so strange. It's not so impressive, not so important, and that seems to be the way the Ramban looked at it. How can you say that? You're making light of the korbanot, and look what it says in the pasuk, Reach Nichoach Lashem. How can you make light of a pasuk like that? So it seems to me that what we have to say is that the Rambam was talking about in the Moreh Nevuchim. He was talking about a temporary kind of situation. He said, how could it be? How could it be? How could what be? How could it be that we can't give korbanot? How could it be that that's God's will? That that's what God wanted us, in the situation that God wanted us to be in as part of a punishment. I mean, how is that possible? So the Rambam said, well, maybe there's a variety of explanations for korbanot. And the explanation that I see that he said in the Moreh Nevuchim, the explanation that had something to do with the religions in the world, which have now passed on and no longer really exist, even though that may not be true about India. But nevertheless, the Rambam says, as far as that aspect of korbanot, that was transferred to education. In other words, there are things that we could learn from korbanot, from the way the nations of the world sacrificed, and the way we are called upon to sacrifice. There's something you could learn from that. But that kind of learning is replaceable. I can replace the korbanot for education. But the fact that the korbanot are also reich nichoach Lashem, meaning that they bring pleasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Or the fact that the Rambam points out that Adam, Arishon, and Chaim Behevel all gave korbanot, and Noach gave korbanot, and this is before there were nations in the world. There were no nations in the biblical purview of things. It was just Cain and Hevel. It was just Noach. That's all there was, and they all sacrificed. So he says that aspect of the sacrifices, the aspect of sacrifices that are pleasing to Hashem, that aspect of sacrifice will be returned to us at the time of the Mashiach. That's what the Rambam says. So if you think of the korbanot in two ways, the korbanot teach us something about the world we live in and teach us something about the world we aspire to. The world we aspire to is a world in which there are korbanot, and we could try to think of why that should be pleasing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Except that the understanding that we have that everything ultimately is a present of the divine maybe helps to understand a little bit about korbanot. But the Rambam says quite clearly that the Mashiach will bring us back to the world of the Torah, meaning that we will have to do the mitzvot as the Torah demands of us that we do them. We won't be able to say, well, now I'm in Chutz La'aretz, now I'm in a different situation, or the world has changed. I can't say anything of that time to the Mashiach. It doesn't make much sense. So the Rambam had these two views of korbanot. As far as the korban being something that's pleasing to Hashem, the Rambam thought that was a necessary position. and something that the Mashiach will bring us back to. But the idea that we can live without korbanot for a time comes because some of the things that the korbanot were supposed to be doing for our benefit, we can take up the reins and do it on our own. So that while it's not clear, the question I think is a good question. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to punish us in this way and sort of eliminate the book of Vayikra from our interest or specific, for what we are specifically challenged by, why we had to leave that be, is not perfectly clear, but it is clear to us that the Rambam did not think that the end of Korbanot was final and that they could be replaced by some other system of thinking. The Rambam thought that the Korbanot were going to be reinstated and as they were in the beginning. And that, he says, is something that we give over to the Mashiach. And so that if the Rambam thought of Yemot HaMashiach as being something real, he thought of the return of Korbanot as being something real. Tov, all the best. Be well.